The first time Ambassador Shira Vanthal of the Luminary Collective laid eyes on Captain Devin Mercer, she visibly recoiled. Her luminescent skin, normally a calm, pulsating azure, flashed a startling crimson. The elaborate crystalline structures extending from her temples quivered with unmistakable revulsion. Devin had been warned about the Luminary's extreme aesthetic sensibilities. Their species had evolved on a world bathed in the light of 3 suns, developing photosynthetic skin and crystalline sensory organs that perceive beauty as a form of sustenance. But nothing had prepared him for the raw disgust in Shira's opalescent eyes. "This is unacceptable," she said, her melodic voice somehow making the insult sound like poetry. "I specifically requested appropriate representation from Earth. Not this." General Harlow, who had arranged the meeting at Outpost Epsilon, cleared his throat. "Ambassador Vanthal, Captain Mercer is our foremost expert on interspecies diplomacy. His credentials are unmatched." Shira's translucent fingers, each tipped with a perfect crystalline structure, waved dismissively. "His qualifications are irrelevant. The Luminary cannot be expected to negotiate with a species so." She paused, searching for a diplomatic word before giving up. "Hideous." Devin had faced prejudice before. Humans were relatively new to the Galactic Alliance, and many older species viewed them with suspicion or disdain. But the Luminary's disgust was purely aesthetic, and therefore somehow more personal. "Ambassador," Devin said, keeping his voice level, "I understand your species places extraordinary value on physical beauty. But surely diplomatic relations between our peoples shouldn't hinge on something so subjective." Shira's crystalline structures flashed with pulses of light, the luminary equivalent of laughter. "Subjective. Beauty is the foundation of civilization, Captain. It's the difference between sentience and savagery." Her gaze traveled over his face, his hands, his uniform with undisguised revulsion. "Your species' evolutionary path has been unfortunate." General Harlow looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. This partnership was critical. The Luminary controlled access to rare crystalline technologies that Earth desperately needed. But they'd been resistant to human overtures for years, citing aesthetic incompatibility. "Perhaps," Devin suggested, "we could conduct our negotiations via holographic interface, if my appearance is so disturbing." "Your entire physical presence distorts the harmonic energy of this room," Shira interrupted. "Even your scent disrupts the photonic resonance patterns." She turned to General Harlow. "I will return to my ship and reconsider this arrangement. Perhaps your government can find a more suitable representative." After she swept from the room, General Harlow collapsed into his chair. "That went well," he muttered. Devin remained standing, thoughts racing. The Luminary were notorious for their beauty standards, but they were also logical beings. There had to be a way to bridge this gap. "Sir, request permission to approach this differently." Harlow looked up wearily. "We need this alliance, Mercer. The Draveri are getting bolder on our outer colonies, and without Luminary shield technology, we're vulnerable." "I understand, sir. But appealing to the Luminary's aesthetics isn't working. Let me try something else." 2 hours later, Devin stood on the observation deck of Outpost Epsilon. The vast panorama of stars stretched before him, and among them, the sleek, crystalline shape of the Luminary diplomatic vessel gleamed like a jewel. A soft chime announced another presence. He turned to see Shira entering the deck, her movements fluid and graceful. She stopped abruptly when she saw him. "Captain Mercer, I was told this deck would be empty." "My apologies, Ambassador. I wanted to show you something before you departed." Curiosity overcame her revulsion. "Show me what?" Devin gestured toward a control panel, and the lights dimmed. The star field before them seemed to brighten in response. "Computer, activate Project Aurora. Authorization Mercer Delta 7. The space between them filled with light, intricate, dancing patterns of color and form that swirled and evolved. It was a mathematical model of human music translated into light and movement. something Devon had been developing as a personal project. Shira's crystalline extensions vibrated in surprise. "This is human art. A translation of it. Bax cello suite no. One rendered as a mathematical light form. I thought it might speak across our differences." She moved closer to the display, her natural luminescence interacting with the projected light patterns in unexpected ways. For several minutes she simply observed, her disgust momentarily forgotten. "Interesting," she finally said. "There is structure here. Harmony. I wouldn't have expected such understanding from your kind." It wasn't much, but it was the first non-insulting thing she'd said to him. Devon took it as progress. "Beauty takes many forms, Ambassador. Perhaps our species simply perceive it differently." "Perhaps," she conceded, though her tone suggested skepticism. "This changes nothing about our diplomatic situation, however. The Collective Council would never approve regular physical contact with humans. Our population would find it too distressing." Devon nodded. "What if I proposed a compromise? A joint mission, you and I, to the Draveri border worlds. We could establish a preliminary framework for cooperation without involving the broader luminary population." Shira's skin pulsed with surprise. "You wish to travel alone with me, despite my reaction to your appearance? I believe our mutual interests outweigh personal discomfort. The Draveri threat affects us both." She studied him, her opalescent eyes unreadable. "Your species continues to confound me, Captain. You lack beauty, yet you persist in pursuing relationships with those so clearly your aesthetic superiors." Devon smiled slightly. "Perhaps that's our one redeeming quality, Ambassador. Humans have never let our limitations define our aspirations." For the first time, Shira seemed to look at him with something other than disgust, perhaps curiosity, or even the faintest glimmer of respect. "Very well, Captain. One mission, to determine if cooperation is even possible. But I warn you, proximity will not improve my physiological response to your appearance." "Noted, Ambassador. I'll try not to take it personally." As they made arrangements for their joint mission, Devon couldn't help wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. The Luminary were notoriously difficult even under the best circumstances. A confined space with an alien who found him physically repulsive was hardly ideal. But as General Harlow often said, diplomacy wasn't about comfort. It was about finding common ground where none seemed to exist. If Devon had to endure being treated like a walking aesthetic offense to forge an alliance that could save human lives, so be it. What he couldn't possibly know was that this mission would not only reshape human-luminary relations, but would fundamentally challenge everything the luminary believed about beauty itself. And it would all begin with a crisis neither of them could have anticipated. As Shira departed the observation deck, her crystalline extensions flickered with conflicted emotions. The human was undeniably hideous. His opaque skin, his fixed facial features, his bizarre hair follicles, all of it violated the most basic principles of beauty that govern luminary society. Yet his light symphony had been unexpectedly harmonious. It suggested depths that contradicted her people's understanding of humans as aesthetically primitive beings. She would observe this Devon Mercer more closely during their mission. For scientific purposes, of course. Nothing more. The diplomatic vessel Luminous Harmony glided through the cosmos with all the grace its name suggested. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but harmonious. "Your breathing pattern disrupts the ship's acoustic balance," Shira remarked, her crystalline extensions vibrating with irritation. She sat across from Devon in the ship's command center, a chamber designed with the sweeping organic curves typical of luminary architecture. Every surface seemed alive with subtle pulses of light. Devon suppressed a sigh. They had been traveling for 3 days, and Shira had found fault with virtually everything about him. From his asymmetrical facial structure to what she called his erratic thermal emissions. "I apologize, Ambassador," he said evenly. "Unfortunately, respiration is not negotiable for my species." A flash of violet rippled across Shira's skin, the luminary equivalent of disdain. The collective's anthropologists claim humans have remarkable adaptive capabilities. Perhaps you could simply breathe less. Devon couldn't tell if she was serious. The luminary, with their photosynthetic biology, required only minimal respiratory function. Their crystalline sensory structures absorbed energy directly from light, making them far less dependent on oxygen exchange. "I'll do my best," he offered diplomatically. "Perhaps we should focus on our approach to the Draveri situation." The mention of their mission seemed to center Shura. Her skin tone shifted to a more professional blue as she activated a holographic display between them. "The Draveri have established 3 new outposts along the Vega corridor," she said, indicating glowing red markers, each positioned to intercept trade routes between our systems. The Draveri were a predatory species who had evolved from pack hunters, opportunistic, aggressive, and expanding rapidly. What they lacked in technology, they made up for in numbers and ruthlessness. "Intelligence suggests they're targeting isolated colonies first," Devon added, testing defenses before committing to larger engagements. Shura's eyes, iridescent orbs without pupils, fixed on him with surprising intensity. "Your species has fought them before. 3 skirmishes in the past Earth year. We repelled them, but at significant cost. Yet you did not request Alliance intervention." Devon hesitated. The truth was complicated. Earth's position in the Galactic Alliance remained precarious. Too many older species viewed humans as primitive upstarts, barely deserving of recognition. Admitting weakness could have political consequences. "We handle our own problems," he said simply. Something like curiosity flickered across Shura's features. An admirable, if misguided, principle. The Draveri interpret self-reliance as isolation, and isolation as vulnerability. The ship's navigation system chimed softly, interrupting their conversation. Shura turned her attention to the controls, her translucent fingers dancing across interfaces designed specifically for luminary physiology. "We are approaching the border station," she announced. "The collective maintains an outpost here, minimally staffed, but equipped with our latest sensor technology. It will provide the secure communications we need to contact both our governments." Devon nodded, studying the small crystalline structure that appeared on the view screen. It resembled a geometric snowflake, delicate yet somehow imposing against the backdrop of space. "It's beautiful," he remarked without thinking. Shura glanced at him, genuine surprise rippling across her skin. "You can perceive its beauty." "Of course. Why wouldn't I? Human aesthetic perception is limited. Your sensory range captures only a fraction of the luminescent harmonics that define true beauty." Devon smiled slightly. "We make do with what we have, Ambassador." Before Shura could respond, the ship's alarm system activated, a melodic but urgent series of tones rather than the harsh klaxons of human vessels. "Multiple vessels approaching," she reported, her fingers moving rapidly across the controls. "Configuration unknown." The view screen shifted to show 3 angular, predatory-looking ships emerging from the shadow of a nearby asteroid field. Their design was unmistakable. "Draveri," Devon said grimly. "How did they know we'd be here?" Shura's skin paled to an alarmed white. "This outpost's location is classified." They shouldn't. The first impact cut her off. The luminous harmony shuddered as enemy weapons fire connected with its shields. "Defensive systems activating," Shura announced, her voice remaining calm despite the crisis. "But this is a diplomatic vessel, not a warship." Devon moved to a secondary console. "Can I access tactical systems from here?" Shura hesitated for only a moment before pressing a crystalline pendant at her throat. The console before Devon reconfigured itself, symbols shifting to a more universal format. "Your military background might prove useful after all," she conceded. Devon's fingers flew across the controls, assessing their situation. The luminary vessel was indeed primarily designed for diplomatic functions, but its defensive capabilities were impressive, multi-layered photonic shields that adapted to enemy fire patterns. "Their weapons are concentrated on our propulsion systems," he observed. "They're trying to disable rather than destroy us." Capture would be worse than destruction, Shira said flatly. Travari interrogation techniques are comprehensive. Another hit rocked the ship. The lights flickered momentarily before stabilizing. We need to reach your outpost, Devon decided. Its defensive systems could give us an advantage. Shira's expression suggested doubt. The station is minimally armed. It's a research and communication hub, not a fortress. Then we'll have to be creative. Devon studied the tactical display. These shield configurations, can they be modified to emit a directed energy pulse? Theoretically, yes, but we could create a localized radiation surge, blind their sensors long enough to make a run for the station. Shira's crystalline extensions vibrated with what might have been reluctant admiration. Unconventional, but possible. It would require precise timing. They worked together with surprising synchronicity, Devon's tactical experience complementing Shira's intimate knowledge of her ship's systems. As the Travari vessels closed in, forming a triangular attack pattern, Devon counted down. Now, the luminous harmony shields pulsed brilliantly, releasing a concentrated burst of energy that temporarily overwhelmed the Travari sensors. In that moment of confusion, Shira executed a maneuver that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The diplomatic vessel pirouetted through space with impossible grace, slipping between two Travari ships and accelerating toward the outpost. Impressive, Devon couldn't help saying. Luminary helmsmanship is considered an art form, Shira replied, a hint of pride coloring her voice. Though our pursuers will recover momentarily. Indeed, the Travari ships were already adjusting course, their weapons systems recharging. The outpost loomed larger on their view screen, its crystalline structure reflecting starlight in hypnotic patterns. The station's defensive protocols should recognize my ship and provide cover, Shira said. But as they approached, the outpost remained ominously dark and unresponsive. Something's wrong, Devon observed. No automated response, no defense activation. Shira's skin pulsed with anxiety. The station should be hailing us. Unless they got here first, Devon finished her thought. The outpost may already be compromised. Faced with this new complication, they had seconds to decide. Return to open space where they'd be outgunned by the Travari, or risk docking with a potentially captured station. Your recommendation, Captain? Shira asked, surprising Devon with her deference. He studied the tactical display, mind racing through scenarios. Dock with the station. We'll have better chances against boarding parties in confined spaces than against 3 ships in open space. Shira nodded and adjusted their approach vector. The luminous harmony glided toward the outpost's main docking port with precision that belied their desperate circumstances. Prepare for emergency docking, she announced as the Travari ships closed the distance behind them. The ship shuddered as magnetic clamps engaged. Emergency lights activated throughout the vessel. Docking complete, Shira reported. But the station's internal systems remain unresponsive. Devon moved toward the weapons locker, retrieving 2 sleek luminary defensive weapons. He offered one to Shira, who accepted it with visible reluctance. Violence disrupts harmonic balance, she said, though her grip on the weapon was sure and practiced. Sometimes discord is necessary to restore harmony, Devon replied. Something shifted in Shira's expression, a flicker of reassessment. Your understanding of luminary philosophy is surprisingly nuanced for a human. I did my homework before this mission. Seemed prudent. The ship trembled as the Travari vessels attached to other docking ports around the station. They were now effectively surrounded. We need to reach the central command hub, Shira said. From there, I might be able to reactivate the station's defensive systems. Lead the way, Devon replied. I'll cover our rear. As they prepared to enter the station, Shira paused, her skin cycling through patterns that Devon couldn't interpret. Captain Mercer, she said, her melodic voice oddly subdued. If we do not survive this encounter, I wish to acknowledge that despite your species' evolutionary disadvantages, your tactical acumen is not entirely primitive. Coming from a luminary, It was practically effusive praise. "Thank you, Ambassador," Devon replied with a slight smile. "And if we don't make it, I'd like to say that despite your species' aesthetic superiority complex, you're a hell of a pilot." For the first time, a pattern resembling amusement rippled across Shira's luminescent skin. Then her expression hardened as she activated the airlock. "Stay close," she instructed. Draveri hunt in packs. Together they stepped into the silent station, weapons ready, their mutual disdain temporarily overshadowed by the necessity of survival. What awaited them inside would test not only their tenuous alliance, but would force each to see the other in an entirely new light. The outpost's interior was eerily silent, illuminated only by emergency lighting that cast everything in a ghostly blue glow. Devon and Shira moved cautiously through the crystalline corridors, their footsteps creating soft echoes against the geometric surfaces. "Life signs," Devon whispered. Shira consulted a small device on her wrist, its display reflecting in her opalescent eyes. "Minimal. The regular staff complement is only 5. I detect no luminary biosignatures." Her voice remained steady, but her skin dimmed noticeably, a sign of distress. They approached a junction where the corridor split 3 ways. Shira pointed right. "Command center is that way. 2 levels up." A sound, faint but unmistakable, made them both freeze. The soft click of clawed feet against crystalline floors echoed from the left passage. "Draveri," Devon mouthed silently. Shira nodded, her crystalline extensions quivering slightly. They pressed themselves against the wall as 3 Draveri scouts moved past the intersection. The reptilian hunters stood nearly 7 feet tall, their scaled bodies covered with tactical armor. Their elongated heads swiveled constantly, forked tongues flicking out to taste the air. When the patrol passed, Devon and Shira continued toward the command center, moving with heightened caution. They encountered no resistance until they reached the central lift platform. "It's disabled," Shira observed, her fingers moving across a control panel that remained stubbornly dark. "We'll need to find another way up." "Or create one," Devon replied, examining the ceiling. "Service access." Shira followed his gaze. "Yes. Maintenance conduits run throughout the station." She reached up, her long fingers pressing a sequence on what appeared to be a solid section of ceiling. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage. "After you," Devon offered. Shira's lithe form easily ascended into the opening. Devon followed with considerably more effort, his broader human frame less suited to the confined space. They crawled through the narrow conduits in silence until a violent tremor shook the entire station. Devon barely caught himself before falling against Shira. "What was that?" he whispered. "The station's emergency systems are failing," Shira replied, her voice tight. "Without active maintenance, structural integrity will begin to collapse." Another tremor, stronger than the first, sent them both sliding sideways. The conduit wall beside them cracked, and through it, Devon caught a glimpse of stars. The outer hull was beginning to fracture. "We need to move faster," he urged. They increased their pace, reaching a vertical shaft that Shira identified as their access point to the command level. As they climbed, alarms began to sound throughout the station. Discordant, unmelodic warnings that told Devon the situation was deteriorating rapidly. They emerged into a short corridor leading to the command center. The door stood partially open, dislodged from its track by structural damage. Inside, they found chaos. Consoles damaged, crystalline view screens shattered, and signs of a brief but violent struggle. "The staff?" Devon asked, though he already suspected the answer. Shira moved to a fallen luminary crew member, her fingers gently touching the crystalline extensions that had gone dark and lifeless. They did not survive the initial assault. No time for mourning. The station shuddered again, more violently than before. Shira moved quickly to the central command console, which remained partially functional. "Station status?" Devon asked, taking position near the door to watch for Draveri. "Critical," she reported. The Draveri attempted to override our security protocols. When they failed, they triggered a cascading system failure. Whether intentionally or through incompetence, I cannot say. Can you stabilize it? No. The damage is too extensive. Her fingers danced across the controls. However, I can access communications. We must alert our governments to the Draveri incursion. As Shira worked, Devon heard movement in the corridor outside. Company coming, he warned, raising his weapon. Shira nodded without looking up. I need 2 more minutes. The first Draveri appeared in the doorway, its reptilian features displaying surprise at finding resistance. Devon fired, catching it in the shoulder. The creature fell back with a hiss, but was immediately replaced by 2 more. Make it 1 minute, Devon called back, taking cover behind an overturned console as return fire sizzled past him. The battle intensified as more Draveri converged on their position. Devon maintained a steady defense, making each shot count, but they were rapidly being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Transmission complete, Shira announced, but the station's structural integrity is failing completely. We need to evacuate immediately. Back to the ship, Devon asked, firing another precise shot that dropped a Draveri warrior. Impossible. The docking clamps are fused. We need to reach the emergency escape pods. Another violent tremor shook the command center, this one lasting longer than previous ones. Warning lights flashed as atmosphere began venting from multiple breaches. Which way? Devon asked as he fired a final volley to clear their path. Follow me, Shira replied, leading them through a side exit that the Draveri hadn't yet discovered. They raced through corridors that were literally coming apart around them. Crystalline walls fractured, sending sharp shards flying through the air. Devon felt one slice across his cheek, drawing blood, but he kept pace with Shira. The escape pod bay was mercifully clear of Draveri. They had apparently begun their own evacuation as the station's condition deteriorated. Shira quickly accessed a control panel. Only 1 pod remains functional, she reported. The Draveri disabled or took the others. Then we share, Devon replied simply. The pod was designed for luminary physiology. Sleek, somewhat smaller than human escape vessels, with control interfaces that responded to light and touch in equal measure. They squeezed inside as another massive shockwave threatened to tear the station apart completely. Shira activated the launch sequence, and the pod detached from the dying station with a jolt. Through the viewport, Devon watched as the beautiful crystalline structure began to break apart, fragments scattering into space like a dissipating constellation. The Draveri ships? He asked. Retreating, Shira confirmed, checking the pod's limited sensors. They've accomplished their objective, destroying a luminary outpost and stealing our technology. The escape pod accelerated away from the expanding debris field, its small engines struggling to put distance between them and the catastrophe. But something was wrong. The pod's trajectory was becoming increasingly erratic. We're losing power, Shira announced, her voice tense as her fingers worked desperately across the controls. The pod sustained damage during launch. Options? Devon asked, already knowing they were limited. There's a planetary body within range. Barely. Class M, uninhabited, not formally charted. Her skin pulsed with uncertainty. If we can maintain minimal guidance control, we might survive a landing. Might is better than won't, Devon replied with grim humor. The pod's descent into the planet's atmosphere was less a controlled landing and more a moderated crash. Heat built up around their small vessel as friction fought against their velocity. The viewport glowed orange-red, and the interior temperature rose alarmingly. Brace for impact, Shira called out as an expanse of dense forest rushed up to meet them. The crash sent them both hard against their restraints. Devon's head struck something solid, and darkness claimed him momentarily. When he regained consciousness, smoke filled the pod, and warning lights flashed from every surface. Shira, he called out, coughing. The luminary ambassador hung limply in her restraints, Her normally radiant skin dimmed to a dull glow. One of her crystalline extensions had fractured, and a luminescent fluid that might have been blood seeped from the break. Devon forced his way free of his own restraints and moved to her side. "Ambassador, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, their opalescent surfaces clouded with pain. "Captain Mercer, we appear to have survived." "For now," he agreed, quickly assessing their situation. The pod systems were failing completely, and the smoke was getting thicker. "We need to get out of here." With careful movements, he released her restraints and supported her weight as they stumbled toward the emergency hatch. It took 3 tries before the manual override engaged, and the door slid partially open, enough for them to squeeze through into the alien air beyond. They collapsed onto soft ground covered with something resembling moss, but in vivid purple hues. Above them, trees towered hundreds of feet into the sky, their translucent trunks allowing glimpses of not one but 2 suns that painted the alien landscape in perpetual golden twilight. "Are you badly hurt?" Devon asked, turning his attention back to Shura. "My crystalline receptor is damaged," she replied weakly. "Not immediately life-threatening, but—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Devon understood. For the luminary, their crystalline extensions were not merely sensory organs but integral to their energy absorption and processing. "The pod's emergency supplies?" he asked. "Limited, not designed for extended survival." Devon helped her to a sitting position against the twisted root of one of the massive trees. "Then we'll need to assess this planet's resources, find water, shelter, and determine if anything here is compatible with our biology." Shira looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You seem remarkably calm about our situation, Captain." "Panic won't improve our odds," he replied simply. "And it's just Devon now. I think being stranded on an alien planet puts us on a first-name basis." For the first time, what might have been the luminary equivalent of a smile flickered across Shira's features. "Indeed, Devon." As one sun began to set while the other remained fixed in the sky, they took stock of their precarious situation. Stranded on an unknown world, with minimal supplies, surrounded by alien life forms of unknown danger, with no guarantee of rescue. Yet somehow, as Devon began gathering materials to build a temporary shelter, he couldn't help but notice that Shira no longer looked at him with disgust. Crisis, it seemed, had a way of reshaping perceptions more effectively than any diplomatic protocol.